I'm very excited to talk about this topic, and I'm going to preface it by saying that it's still underway. So we're still in the data gathering phase. It is still kind of like coming together into what it's going to look like. And so I'm kind of presenting a few of the preliminary findings and the structure and the thinking about it. I do want to acknowledge Nina and her team as well for the work that they've done previously to get the Tauiwi Bystander project complete and beautiful, and you'll see it on your tables. I had a look through it and it's incredible. And so this one is in conjunction that takes a Kaupapa Māori approach and that thinking to think about what it could look like from that perspective. It's not the best picture of me, but I mean, it's okay. Thank you everyone. Kia ora. I am a researcher at Te Manawa Haukura, a research centre at Te Wānanga o Aotearoa, so one of my colleagues was just there somewhere, so mihi ana. I'm pushing the button. The project is entitled, it draws on a whakatauki, which is Ko tiro he mokopuna koe nā hine titama, and it talks about the role of hine titama, who is the goddess of dawn, and she was maligned, and she had gone through a traumatic experience, and it's about her redemption and her moving through that. So it aligned quite well with that. So that kind of like shows us the positioning that we are taking for this particular project, and taking that Māori starting point. So the theory of change kind of really recognises right from the outset that complementary relationship between men and women as the starting point, the inherent mana and the inherent tapu of all people, to provide the foundation for addressing the issue of sexual harassment in the workplace, because once we can recognise the mana, once we can recognise the tapu in every person, then we're in a place where we can make decisions based on that. So that's how we're coming towards that. So we'll know that we're successful if our theory of change, if our framework is successful, if people are empowered. So if there's an empowerment there, that we have tikanga-based workplaces and culture that is built on respect and promotes respect. That idea of whakawhanaungatanga, that building of relationships is incredibly central to the framework. And we are hoping that the bystander intervention is really culturally grounded. So it draws on Pūrākau, which are Māori narratives. And for Māori in the Māori worldview, these provide the philosophical standpoint, the ways of thinking about the world that support us to understand how to integrate. It's interacting with it. So I'll just use this one. Okay. All right. Goodbye. So the outcomes and impact of it, we're hoping that the intervention will support victims of sexual harassment in the construction and infrastructure sector, and we're wanting to really build those relationships right throughout the journey of people within the sector, from the educational phase through the apprenticeship phase, through early, mid and late career people who are in the sector. It's all woven through that whole journey, the ways of helping bystanders to stand up and say something, creating an environment, creating a culture where people are empowered to do so. We're wanting to create culturally responsive spaces that really provide the foundation for that. Yeah, can you use me? So responsive spaces for that, and creating safety for all workers. So although there's a particular focus on Kaupapa Māori, we're hoping that positioning will support the safety and the well-being of all workers in the industry in terms of sexual harassment. So Pūrākau, for those of us who don't know, they're Māori narratives. So we've probably all heard of Maui and the sun. That's a beautiful example of one. But throughout our culture, we have all of these beautiful oral narratives that provide the basis for understanding the world, understanding ourselves within it. And there's all of this Indigenous wisdom that we can draw on to be able to support us with that. So to frame the framework, we have used narratives. We've used the hine titama, which I explained a little bit earlier. We've used the tāwhaki and the pursuit of justice. So these are kind of like underpinning. Hine moa and tūtanekai, which really showed kind of love and consent and mutual respect, and really drawing on those lessons that are embedded there. Maui and the goddesses. So for this particular framework, we've used the pi waka waka, which is a gorgeous fantail, and in our narratives, the fantail is the original bystander, or upstander, is the one that alerted the goddess of the night to an impending sexual harassment, actually. So with that in mind, we've used that imagery of the pi waka waka to represent that upstander, that bystander, empowering them. So within the parameters of this project, we've looked at, any kind of, we see those things there. I won't unpack them. We all know what they are. But anything that makes people uncomfortable, anything that makes people coerced into doing things that they don't want to do in relationship to these sorts of activities. However, for this particular project, because of the breadth and the space of it, we've decided to keep sexual hostility out of it, sexist hostility. Sexism, yes, it's really big, we know that, and it warrants its own project in itself, whereas this one particularly looks at sexual harassment in terms of sexual hostility, unwanted sexual attention, and sexual coercion. So from the beginning point, our model draws on he kōpū ao. The wharenui in Te Ao Māori is sometimes referred to as a kōpū ao, which is a reference to kind of the femininity and the role of women. And so because we're in the, looking at building and infrastructure, I thought that was a beautiful metaphor to be able to draw on to think about that. And we have 5 at the moment, while we're still unpacking the beautiful kōrero that's coming out of the interviews and the survey that we've sent around. These are the 5 areas that we're looking at, and I'll go into them a little bit more deeply now. So ahurea me te kauanuanu, so that's around cultural awareness and respect, and kind of looks at those things. I've put some of those things up there to show us, but yeah, it's really focused on employers, managers, and the workers, so the range of people within there. Whakawhanaungatanga, strengthening those relationships. One of the really interesting things that has come out of the interviews around whakawhanaungatanga is looking at some of the culture around like roof shouts and things like that. That's really deeply embedded in the building and infrastructure industries and sectors, and how that can be the catalyst for people doing things that they wouldn't ordinarily do. So how do we change the culture, and what are some of these examples that we can use to be able to do that? So these can be really powerful things. Empowering bystanders through manaakitanga, looking at how we support people, how we empower people, people that, say the wrong things or are not behaving the way that they need to be behaving. How do we create an atmosphere and a culture to be able to facilitate them to be able to make good decisions and support those when they need it, which includes those techniques. What are those techniques that we can do? One of the pieces of feedback that we got from one of the surveys was really helpful, and it was around making prompts. Sometimes when we see something that's wrong, it's really hard to know what to say in that moment. We don't want to make things worse. We don't want to make a really big issue. We're not quite sure how to navigate those really difficult conversations and situations. So prompts that can support us to say things. What are little snippets of things we can say to intervene as an upstander? That hapori engagement, so community engagement and support, we know that's really important, creating those networks and those connections across the community to be able to draw into what's already been known and what's already there to support the process. And then, of course, the policies that exist to promote, a wider system change approach. So preliminary findings, as I mentioned, having scripts that can support people to work through. What we do know is there's actually not, this is perhaps one of the very first pieces of research in the world that looks at it from an Indigenous lens for the infrastructure and construction industry. So I think it's quite important, but it also means there's not a great deal to draw on, and we're kind of creating something fresh and very novel. But I think there's a real strong theme coming through the findings at the moment that the people who are responsible for creating the culture and the ways of being within the sector are the ones who will be able to change it. So the expectations that those people who establish the culture are the ones who will be able to change it. So next steps, moving on to the last slide. So I'm going through the process at the moment of aligning all the elements of the model to different Pūrākau, and also thinking about the Māori goddesses, because there's a lot to be said for that, and that kind of, it's a nice revitalisation effort as well, because we know a lot about the Māori gods, but not a great deal about the Māori goddesses, but there's just as many. So we're kind of revealing that again and bringing that into the loop. So, we did a little bit of a variation on the ethics, and we're all good with that, and integrating that kōrero from the data. And then we publish. So hopefully by the end of next month, we will have something written and available and usable for the sector across the board. Nā reira, e mihi ana ki a koutou, ka tuku atua haui te rākau ki a Nina. I'll share with Nina now.
Kia ora. Thank you, Joni. I'm really excited about the work that Joni is doing, and that it will bring us a really different view on the work on sexual harassment. I hope that it adds to the work, and I hope that in some ways it disagrees with some of the work that we're doing, because that's important, that we have perspectives that don't say the same thing, so we can think about how we might change some of those things. Kia ora, ko Nina Herriman tōku inoa. I'm one of the portfolio managers at ConCOVE. My family come from the Waikato, and I live in Tamaki Makaurau, Auckland. It's nice getting compliments, people saying nice things about us. Having a woman around sometimes moderates other people's behaviour. Motherhood is the most important job in the world. Women are natural nurturers. How are we feeling about that? So sometimes things look like compliments, sometimes things are as intended as compliments, but sometimes they don't make us feel very good. So when we talk about women and natural nurturers, we're often talking about them as looking after children, and most of the people who are the primary caregivers of children have been doing research since before they were pregnant, have been continuing to do research throughout the lives of their children. Their children might be grown up and they're still doing research. They've spent time talking to experts, talking to health experts, education experts, maybe a psychiatrist, I don't know. They've done quite a lot of work-based learning, I think, in terms of their job, and spent quite a lot of time talking to other practitioners. So when we say you're natural nurturers, we're kind of not acknowledging all of that work that you have done. And so it might not land in the way it was intended in terms of being a compliment. And sometimes, in our workplaces in particular, we hear things that are not compliments at all, and they make us feel quite bad. And I'm talking about sexual harassment as one of the primary things in the ways that happens. And that's what I want to talk to you about today in terms of the Tauiwi Theory of Change and how we might talk about it, because you're a fabulous group of people, and I hope after the sessions you might want to go away and talk about this work. So, before we go on to a workplace, what's the first thing we need to do? We need to do a little health and safety check. So I'm going to start with that today. First of all, I am not donning my armour and going out on a crusade, because if I do that, I will be tired, I will exhaust myself, and I probably won't affect a lot of change. So if you're talking about this work and you think that the audience isn't going to be receptive, then you don't need to talk about it. So you guys look like a nice group of people. I've got some familiar faces here. I think I'm okay to continue. Second thing is have a support system in place in case things might not go the way that you had expect. So first of all, I've got the fabulous Kylie Taffard, who is my co-lead on this project. So if anything goes wrong, I can have a chat to her. And of course, the fabulous Catherine and George, if there are anything there. So I've done that. The third thing is I'm not going to tell you about my trauma, and nor should you. That makes it really difficult for the person that you are talking to. So often when we're talking to people about things, we come from our own personal experiences, but when we're talking about trauma, it's best not to. Don't give the person you're talking to your problems. The other thing I need to do is I need to make sure that you guys, my audience, are going to be safe. So first of all, you will have seen on the agenda that this is about sexual harassment, so you've got some ideas there. I'm not going to be talking about any particular issues apart from a definition, but if you do want to have help, there are some resources available, and you'll see on your tables, you'll have this card here and a QR code on the back, and on there are some links to WorkSafe, which has a whole lot of resources there. The other thing is I'm not going to give you my problems. Don't give me your problems. Now, I'm very happy to hear your stories and cry with you and get angry with you, but I'm not trained in terms of providing advice to that, and neither are most of you. So if people do come to you with issues, yes, you can cry with them and be angry with them, but make sure you also provide them with the right support. Okay, so we're safe. The next thing we need to do when we go onto a worksite is make sure we're well trained and we know our stuff. So I'm going to spend a little bit of time talking about some of that stuff. So the first thing is, what is sexual harassment? There's a really good definition on the Human Rights website, which you can also find on the link from that card. And that basically says anything of a sexual nature in the workplace that makes you feel uncomfortable. So it might be jokes, it might be pictures on the wall, it might be something worse than that. But knowing what sexual harassment is really important before you have this conversation. The second thing is intersectionality. It's a big word. Basically, it means that we experience discrimination on multiple aspects of our identity. So a woman of colour may experience sexual harassment differently than a Pākehā woman, and it's really important to acknowledge that, and it's one of the reasons that we wanted to have the dual theories of change, so we can have those different perspectives. The next thing I want to talk about is benevolent sexism and positive stereotyping, which sound like really nice things. But as with our compliments, they might not be quite as nice as we might think. So this here is a comic by a woman called Emily, and Emily lived in France, and she probably still lives in France, and worked in IT. And when she first started in the workplace, it was great. People offered her extra help, made sure that she really understood things, and were really supportive of her work. As her career progressed, she discovered that actually her career wasn't really progressing. She got lots of compliments in terms of her work, about being really great in terms of helping with communication, providing support to people, but nothing that really talked about her technical skills. And that's what benevolent sexism can often look like. So this chap here is telling Emily it's really great that she's in the office, that she'll improve communication because they're a bit useless at it. Now remember, Emily's an IT professional. She hasn't been hired for her communication skills, she's been hired for her technical skills. So often with benevolent sexism, our victims really identify it as such, and the people saying it really identify it as such. They're not thinking about how what they're saying and how they're acting might actually be making people feel not very good. So Emily, when she realised this was happening, she changed the way that she worked in the workplace, and she got quite a backlash. Her co-workers were quite negative towards her, and she was demoted from her job because she donned her armour, went out on a crusade by herself, and received the backlash to that. What Emily eventually did is she got together with a group of other people in the sector, and there was a practice in her organisation in France where men were greeted by shaking their hands and women a kiss on the cheek. And all of the women worked together and said, we're not going to do that, we're just going to shake people's hands. And because they worked together as a collective, they were able to make that change. And that's what the Bystander project is about. It's about how we as a sector can work together to make change. The work is called On-Site Upstanders, a bit of a tongue twister, building a bystander culture. Bit of a pun there on some building work. I'd like to start off with acknowledging the researchers, Suzette Dyer from the University of Waikato and Fiona Hurd from AUT. They're both currently in Europe. Suzette is going to be speaking at a conference about this work in a couple of weeks with the fabulous Kylie. So Fiona and Suzette worked with government organisations, industry, tradies and gendered harm specialists, getting those people together in a room so that they could talk to each other in terms of having experts on bystander interventions, so that some of the people as part of those groups had worked with the New Zealand Defence Force, New Zealand Rugby and other areas where there were highly masculine cultures in terms of how to build those bystander cultures. Working with government organisations, Human Rights Commission, WorkSafe, the fabulous people at our two WDCs, some of whom are here today, were really instrumental in that work. What they started with is, where are we now? I'm going to spend a bit of time and just read what some of this says. The culture was felt to be unwelcoming, reinforcing the perception that it's primarily a space for men. Women on site needed to adjust their behaviour, dress and language, feeling they couldn't be their true selves at work. Now, the important thing about this is this culture enables sexual harassment and other hostile work environment behaviours to thrive. So it wasn't sexual harassment, but that work environment enabled that sexual harassment to thrive. So this is where we are, but where do we want to be? And that was the next thing that they talked about with the focus groups. So the construction and infrastructure is inclusive. Everyone goes to work and is valued for who they are. And if there are hostile work environments, they are called out and seen as a responsibility for everybody. So where we were, where we want to go, and then the theory of change is how we get there. So you'll see on the tables there is that theory of change, and you can also access it from the QR code on the card there. I'm going to talk in particular about one of the things that they recommend, and that is around training initiatives. So developing training across the sector, but also leadership training. At ConCOVE, we've recently added leaders as learners leaders and managers as learners, because we know that if we're going to implement change, leadership is really important to that work. So making sure that training isn't just for people in the workforce, but also their leaders. When we were talking to the people who had done this work in other sectors, what they talked about is the people would arrive to come and talk to them after their leader had rolled their eyes and said, oh, you're off to see the crazy feminists. So having the leaders supportive of it can have a really big impact. So in the short term, we might see regular engagement with training providers and included in trades training. In the longer term, we might be talking about how does that include in our procurement and our contracts in terms of having that training available, and then how we might measure it. Now, as we all know from a systems change perspective, if you simply just change the training and don't change anything else around it, nothing's going to change. So there are 7 key recommendations in the report, and those are the first 3 about the sector working together in terms of being leaders, agreeing what good practice looks like. And Karen, I loved your lovely point around good practice versus best practice, because there is multiple good ways of doing things, and having reporting sector-wide. Starting the procurement conversation, talking with those big providers and asking them, how do you put this into the contracts? Bystander supporting actions. So Joni talked about the need to give people a language and scripts. So does anybody, if I say to you, Monique thinks you're dumb, what do you think of? Ghost trips, I heard ghost trips over there, yes. I'm internalising a complicated situation in your head, your head, and I can't eat your ghost chips pro. So that was a campaign in over 10 years ago now around drunk driving, particularly in young people. And it gave young people a way to call out their friends for drunk driving in a way that was funny and non-threatening, but also allow them to do that. So how do we do that in our sectors, that we give people a language to be able to call people out in a way that isn't threatening? And finally, filling the gaps in our understanding. So the Kaupapa Māori project is part of that. Eve has a project on women in construction, looking at doing a survey so that we can understand what people's experiences are actually like. So if you want to find out more detail about the theory of change, again, the QR code is on those cards. You can go and see that there. There is also a link to a lot of resources about some of the things that I've talked about. A link to the comic about Emily, some nice, easy-to-read videos. You can't read videos. Watch videos and read articles so that you can understand that without having to trawl through a bunch of academic literature. The other thing you can do is let's come back to these compliments that I gave at the beginning. Let's think about how we talk about things and how we think about things. How might we rephrase these? First of all, looking after others is hard work. Let's acknowledge that. Let's think about that in the way that we value the people that we work, and that there are lots of people on our workforce of all sorts of genders who might be doing that work, and let's value all of them. Let's think about, it's my job to make sure that I behave appropriately in the workplace, whether there is a woman or there or not, because lots of men don't like those behaviours either. Let's talk about parenting as an important job, but the paid work that you do is also important and valuable, and I will support you to do both. And those 3 last words are really important, if you wish, because all of this work is about choices. So let's make sure that the people in our sector have those choices.